Good evening, I'm Dan DeRose with Channel 19, and this starts our 2-hour digital coverage of America Decides, a major night for the future of this country, for the future of the White House, and right here in the state of Ohio, who we are sending to Washington, who we're sending to Columbus, for that matter, is going to be decided over the next long few hours. Let's get to some of the early results that are already in. Any results that we show on our screen will have been called by the Associated Press. We will make no designations ourselves. This will all be from the Associated Press. So right off the rip, we have Vermont being called for Vice President Kamala Harris. And let's be honest of what these early decisions are. These are states that were always a hard lean, if not more a lock, than anything else. So what we are looking for tonight are surprises, and we are getting two more results coming in live. Mississippi and Alabama being declared by the Associated Press, as well as Tennessee, Oklahoma. You can see they're coming in rapidly because these are polls that have closed, and whether it's exit polling data, whether it is mail-in votes that have been released as soon as their polls closed, you can see the results coming in. We're also now seeing more states. We've got Connecticut, Massachusetts for Kamala Harris. Keep an eye, and it's going to be early. This is going to be a long count up to 270 when we see that Kamala Harris has 59 now. We're going to check on New York as we walk through here, but former President Donald Trump at 56 electoral votes. Remember, one candidate or the other needs to secure 270 of these electoral votes to claim the presidency. We've got a lot of different options here. Let's take a look at the state of Ohio. Again, these are very, very early numbers. We can see Kamala Harris with a lead so far. I want you to keep an eye in the upper right-hand corner. Just 2% reporting. This is extremely early for the state of Ohio. Let's keep in mind that when it comes to early voting, whether you did it in person, whether you did it via mail, almost always in the state of Ohio at least, not always the case around the country, but in the state of Ohio, it is a heavy lean for Democrats. Democrats like to get out early, stand at their county board of elections. We saw even as recent as this weekend in Cuyahoga County, a 2-hour wait to vote at the board of elections on Saturday. Early numbers here, but what will be interesting to watch throughout the evening is in the case of like Cuyahoga County. We know Cuyahoga County is going to be blue. How much can Kamala Harris win Cuyahoga County by? When we look at the major cities, whether it's Cuyahoga County, whether we come down to Columbus and look at Franklin County, she needs to start stacking votes in these urban areas to have any chance. Now, more than likely, Trump took this state 4 years ago. We will watch for exit polling data. We will watch for the rest of this to come in. Let's go to, we can look at early numbers for the Senate race. We expect this to be razor thin. We're watching live results come in as we speak. Sherrod Brown currently leading 51% to 46%. You'll notice in the upper right, 0% reporting. That's because these are going to be early mail-in or people who stood in line to vote early in person. It is an early night. Let's take a look at issue 1. Issue 1, again, very early, 50%, 50.8 to 49.2. This is just going to have to be something that we follow throughout the evening. The one thing I do want you to notice there on issue 1 is that it is following what we see with our votes, whether it's Republican versus Democrat. Notice that it is the urban communities, Cleveland, Toledo, no results quite yet from Columbus, but Cincinnati voting yes, and so far rural populations voting no on issue 1. That is, of course, the referendum, the ballot issue concerning how the state's maps are drawn when it comes to voting for Congress, for House of Representatives, and our Senate, as well as our state representatives. This has been a big issue for the state of Ohio. We'll quickly come through some of our House seats that are up for grabs. Jim Jordan, the incumbent, winning heavily in District 4. Let's go to District 5 again very early. Bob Latta is the incumbent in that seat. When we get to the eastern side, the eastern side of Ohio, we have Michael Ruley in an early lead, but these are again very early. The one that will be closely watched is the Amelia Sykes. She is the incumbent, and Kevin Coughlin. This is going to be an interesting. I want to take the banner down here for just a second. Notice Akron, blue. That's notoriously a blue county in the state of Ohio, but it is connected to Stark County and Canton. Canton, notoriously a red county. So that could be a very big battle throughout the evening. So we're going to keep an eye on our electoral map, but we do want to have a discussion about what we're going to see and what is playing out early in this. We've got experts over the next 2 hours from some of our local higher institutions of learning. We are extremely blessed to have with us tonight from the School of Law at Case Western Reserve, Jonathan Enton. We also have from Baldwin Wallace, Lauren Copeland. She describes herself as a politics and data science nerd, and that's where we're going to start. Professor Copeland, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Well, we couldn't be more proud than to have you with us. It is extremely early. As I said, we almost have to look for the surprises tonight. When we start talking about surprises, whether it's the 7 states that everybody seems to think are going to play the key roles here. We're talking about Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. What are we looking for tonight? What should our viewers be looking for when it comes to surprises?
Well, there's some interesting dynamics at play, especially in Pennsylvania, which could be the tipping point state for either Trump or Harris. They aren't allowed to process their ballots until Election Day by law. And so, whereas in Ohio, we tend to see a blue wave when the polls close, in Pennsylvania, the results can tend to appear red. And then as the mail-in vote gets counted, they can tend to go more blue. So that's something to definitely watch in terms of the states, is what is the order in which the ballots are being counted.
And we have a number of states that have already closed their polls. Obviously, one of the big ones to watch, 2 of the big ones at 7:30, North Carolina closed its polls. That's expected to be a tight race. And in Pennsylvania, 8 o'clock, the polls closed just 8 minutes ago. What do we expect from Pennsylvania? It is our neighbor. I think about the late, great Tim Russert, who was the political analyst for NBC, who one year wrote on his little whiteboard, Ohio, Ohio, Ohio. If Tim Russert was still with us, perhaps it would say Penn, Penn, Penn. Why is Pennsylvania maybe at the center of tonight's election?
Pennsylvania has a bunch of electoral votes at stake, more votes than Michigan and Wisconsin. And so it's that state that's often called the tipping point state, the one that could take Trump or Harris to 270. I believe it's Nate Silver who said that in 17% of his simulations as to who gets to 270, it was Pennsylvania that decided the election.
And it's Pennsylvania is an interesting one to watch. We all had to watch it 4 years ago when it was Biden-Trump. You have a couple of issues when you start to look at the state of Pennsylvania, especially. Hey, Cuyahoga County, we get it. We're a massive county. We're generally always the last county to get all our votes counted. That's going to happen when you're a major urban area. You have to get all your ballots back to the warehouse in Cuyahoga County, and then they have to be certified and tabulated. Pennsylvania has very much the same issue, especially when it comes to Philadelphia. Why was Philadelphia, and why is that such a massive issue when we get into these urban areas?
Well, we know about that the urban-rural divide in the US tends to be as big as or greater than the Republican-Democrat divide, with urban areas voting overwhelmingly for Democrats. And so when you're talking about Philadelphia, it's much like talking about Cleveland, Columbus, or Cincinnati, where there is going to be a substantial number of Democratic votes there. And since it's going to take some time for them to count all those ballots, especially those mail-in ballots, it might be a while before we actually know the results of the election there.
And we've had a few more states decided or at least called by the AP. And I'm going to again be very clear. We are not making these projections here at Cleveland 19. Any state that you see filled in on this map has been declared by the Associated Press. There's a very specific formula that they use to declare a state so that there is little to no back and forth. Oh, it is, for this candidate. Now it's for this candidate. That's not how it operates. We can see now Kamala Harris claiming Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Maryland. Again, no surprises there. And Professor Copeland, if I speak out of turn here, if you see a surprise on this map that I don't, feel free to jump in. And then we look for Trump, what has been called now South Carolina, and Florida, with its 30 electoral votes, has been deemed red and has been called for Donald Trump. Professor Copeland, as we look at this map here, do you see anything that surprises you as of yet?
No surprises here. These match standard historical patterns. The ones in Florida are relatively new, with the Hispanic and Latino population in Miami-Dade trending towards President Trump in 2016, 2020, and now 2024. So whereas Florida used to be a battleground state, it's solidly in the Republican column. No surprises yet.
Where do you expect there would be a surprise or two tonight? Or does it come down to the 7 states that are the swing states?
I believe it comes down to the 7 battleground states. I'm really interested to watch the states that have abortion or reproductive rights on the ballot, because we know that even in states that trend more conservative, like Kansas and Ohio, voters have overwhelmingly voted to support reproductive rights amendments to their state constitutions at the range of about 57%. So in Arizona, for example, reproductive rights is on the ballot. And so even though the polls have Trump in the lead there, it's going to be interesting to see those results, because we know that people who are going to be voting in favor of reproductive rights will also be voting for Harris.
As we continue to keep an eye on our map, what we can do is I want to do some retrospective here. You can see we've got in the upper right-hand corner 2024. That's, of course, this year selected. What I want to do is I want to first go back to 2016. This is how the state came, how the nation voted when it came to Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. And where I want our viewers to really pay attention when we go from 2016 to 2020. So you have Trump winning this election in 2016. He then has to battle Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden at the time. And I want people to pay particular attention to Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin as I switch this to 2020. And you see where President Joe Biden made his inroads. It was Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, where he took, and let's remember, 4 years ago, it was ultimately Arizona that held up the show. They had 11 electoral votes up for grabs, and they needed to get all of their votes tabulated. It wasn't until Saturday of election week last 4 years ago that we were able to call that. So, Professor Copeland, as we look at this map, and when you see this change from here's 2016 to 2020, what do you want our viewers to pay particular particular attention to as it relates to tonight? So here's 2016, Trump v. Clinton, and here is Trump v. Biden. What do you want people to notice?
Well, if we go all the way back to 2012, Biden won what is called the Blue Wall, which includes Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Trump flipped them in 2016 by margins as small as 20,000 votes. And then Biden flipped them in 2020 by margins that were just as small, especially in Wisconsin. We know that Harris's easiest path to the White House is through this industrial Midwest, through this blue wall. It's really important for Harris to win these states because if she doesn't, it's hard for the math to add up elsewhere. And so I think it's going to be a long night in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania because the races have just been so close in the past.
And I want to go over some of those numbers you just cited. In Arizona alone, Biden won Arizona by 10,457 votes. Now, to the average person, you hear that number, 10,000, and you think, well, geez, that's a lot of votes. But it really isn't. I want you to explain when we're talking an entire state that came down to 10,457 votes. Is that not a lot?
That's nothing. I mean, in Ohio, which has had a declining population over the past couple of decades, Frank LaRose is expecting a record turnout at 6 million. So 10,000 of just 6 million in Ohio is a lot. And it really speaks to the point that every vote counts. Oftentimes we believe that when we're going to the polls or when we're not, that our vote doesn't make the difference. But I'm thinking that people in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are feeling that importance of their vote this year.
That'll also happen when you have candidates showing up to your state every other day asking for you to attend a rally. Some of those other numbers, Wisconsin was the next closest at 20,682 votes. Then we had Nevada decided by just 33,000 votes. Michigan, then Pennsylvania, it's starting to widen, 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania. But again, a lot bigger state there. The population of Pennsylvania a lot bigger than Wisconsin, than what we're looking at in Arizona, and then finally Michigan. Being decided by 154,000 votes. Professor Copeland, we're going to get back to you. I want to keep you with us over the next hour. We're going to keep rolling this along as we're going to look at our map again. Just want to make sure we're not missing anything when it comes to states that have been called so far by the AP. We're going to take this down. We see that we still have Indiana, Alabama, Oklahoma. These all look to be the same, 95 to 35, but again, it is extremely early. We are also joined by Case Western Reserve University School of Law professor Jonathan Entent. Jonathan, Professor Entent, we have spent a lot of time together talking about the issues over the last couple of months. We appreciate you having the time for us again tonight. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me back.
Well, we certainly appreciate you having back, especially because of your expertise. Do you want to start with what we've seen so far tonight, or should we delve right into issue one?
Well, let's start with what we've seen tonight. I mean, I think Professor Copeland has done a really good job here, but let me focus on one reason why we might be looking for a long night in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And there's a legal reason for that. In both of those states, the early votes and the absentee ballots cannot even be opened until after the polls close. And that means that you have thousands of these votes, and the poll workers can't even make sure that they lay flat and things like that. So with thousands of votes, it will take longer, no matter how efficient the poll workers might be.
And explain how that's different in the state of Ohio. What's the process here? I tend to think, and I'm just a journalist, I'm not the expert like you are, but Ohio seems to have a pretty good process because as soon as the polls close, 7:30, we generally start to get some of those results pretty quickly.
That's right. In Ohio, it is possible for the boards of elections actually to begin processing. I mean, they don't actually do the count ahead of time, but they have everything set up and they're ready to go. And so that's why we see thousands of votes reported in Ohio, even though we have just a fraction of 1% of the precincts officially reporting that those are the in-person votes today.
We've got that pulled up, and we can see that it's just 3% reporting at this point.
Right.
But almost every county already has something registering, and that's because they're allowed to process them. Meaning, I believe the day of the election, they can start scanning all of those thousands and thousands of ballots. They can only scan them. They cannot hit enter or tabulate until 7:30, if I'm correct there.
I think that's right. And so what you get is the important work just to get to the count. They've already done that in Ohio, whereas in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they don't even start on that stuff until the polls actually close. And so that's why it takes so much longer to get results. And so I know there have been efforts in those states to change the rules, but the political situation in those states is divided, and the parties have disagreed about that, so they haven't really been able to move things along.
And Professor, we have the ability here, as we're looking at just 3% reporting. Take a look at the upper right, just 3% reporting very early. I can switch this back to just 4 years ago. Here we are in 2020. Here's how the state of Ohio looked. And I want to ask you about this, and whether you're looking at Ohio, whether you're looking at Pennsylvania, Iowa, Illinois, why is it that we always see these blue urban areas? They're always blue. Cuyahoga County will be blue until you hold your breath and you're blue in the face. It will forever be blue. Columbus, Franklin County is blue. Hamilton County, blue. Toledo, Lucas County is blue. The whole rest of the state, aside from Athens County, and I want to make sure I get this correct, Montgomery County, why do we see sort of this all red and urban blues? What is behind a map like this?
Right. And that reflects that you have different kinds of communities in different places. I suspect Professor Copeland can fill in some details here, but cities around the country have traditionally been Democratic, and rural areas have tended to be Republican. I think that we're seeing a starker contrast now than we did at some points in the past, but I think that we've always seen a bit of an urban-rural divide. So that's not a big surprise. And I think if you go back over presidential elections and certainly in the 21st century, and I suspect even earlier, you will see that the states that Democratic candidates have won have been heavily urban, and the states that Republican candidates have won have been heavily rural. And if you look in those states, you see that the Democratic candidates do better in the urban and metropolitan areas, and the Republicans in the more rural areas. If you look, for example, at the number of counties that a Republican presidential candidate carries, it's lopsided in terms of the number of counties, but the counties that Republican candidates tend to carry in presidential elections tend to be more sparsely populated, and so they get overwhelmed by the Democratic success in the more urban and metropolitan areas.
Correct. For example, 4 years ago, Ohio goes to Donald Trump. But well, let's just use two counties as an example. Let's use Cuyahoga County. Yes, Joe Biden wins Cuyahoga County, but more than just the percentage, more than just winning by 66.5%. Take a look at the number of votes: 416,000 votes versus 202,000. He wins by more than 200,000 votes. So when you think about that 200,000 number, now let's just pick at random a rural county. Okay, so here's Wyandotte County. President Trump wins it by 74%, but by only 6,000 more votes. He has to go around and win all of these rural counties by these small numbers, big percentages, but small numbers. Professor Copeland, feel free to weigh in on this. Why do we see this more and more now, where you get all of these little counties where you only have 20,000 people voting, as opposed to Cuyahoga County, where you have a total of more than 600,000 voting? Why do we see urban counties going blue and rural counties going red?
Sure, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I head up the Civil Discourse Initiative at BW, and one of the things we talk about is how people come to have the opinions they do. One of the things we talk about is if you grow up in a rural area, for example, you're more likely to support gun rights and gun ownership because you use guns for sports, and people who support gun rights tend to vote for the Republican Party. But in urban areas, you tend to be surrounded by a lot of gun violence. And so people tend to be more supportive of restrictions on gun ownership. And those people tend to vote Democratic. On top of these lived experiences that inform people's opinions on issues, you have demographic overlays. So urban areas tend to be much more diverse. There's a larger concentration of Latinos, African Americans, and people of other non-white races and ethnicities. And people who are non-white tend to vote more so for Democratic candidates than they do for Republican candidates, especially among African American candidates who have traditionally supported the Democratic Party since the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In contrast, the rural counties tend to be overwhelmingly white, and the white population tends to be more supportive of Republican counties. So there's a couple of different dynamics going on there, but it's really important to understand in states like Ohio and in Pennsylvania is that if Democrats want to win statewide, the vote for the Democrats needs to be so high in those urban counties as to outweigh the totality of all the rural counties that come in.
It's very similar to what we saw in Georgia 4 years ago, and that's why that state was so pivotal so late in the evening, and I believe in the day or two after is you had a massive number of votes coming from Atlanta, the county that Atlanta is housed in, and it took them a long time to get those tabulated. And it was this idea that if you could get Atlanta Democratic voters to come out in such a number that it could overwhelm the rest of what is a pretty red state, that's how Georgia was won. We don't quite see Wisconsin with states like that. Yes, Madison County, where the college university and the capital of the state is, and Wisconsin University, that is heavily blue. But in a state like Wisconsin, is that enough? You've got Green Bay, you've got some smaller communities, La Crosse. Same idea in a state like Wisconsin. You better get out your blue votes in your urban areas in big numbers.
Sure, you need Milwaukee, you need the University of Wisconsin-Madison and other areas like Green Bay, but Wisconsin is a more level playing field. Of course, it has those urban areas, but they're not as overwhelming as the size of the urban areas in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And so It's really a statewide ground game that the candidates must execute successfully to win that vote.
And we look at Wisconsin, they're worth 10 electoral votes. Professor Entin, when we look at these, this map of the electoral votes that are going to be awarded through all of this, a pretty good time to give people a civics lesson. Let's remind you, when you win your state, whether you're Harris or Trump, you win the electoral votes. This is not a popular vote contest. This is an electoral vote contest. So why is a state like Wisconsin, why a state like Michigan, just worth 10 and 15 respectively, why are they so important? Why are they playing such a big role when we look at a state like Florida at 30, when we look at a state like California at 54 that will ultimately be blue? The AP could almost color that in right now, just as they could almost color in Texas right now at 40. When we're talking about states that have 54, 40, and 30, why does this come down to states with 10 and 15 and Iowa that has just 6?
Because you have to get, as we see on the screen, you have to get to 270. And you can sweep California and Florida and New York and the big a handful of big states. That's not enough to get you to 270. So you need a number of other states. Moreover, because the country is so divided between Democrats and Republicans, it's the Electoral College actually historically has magnified the differences in the popular vote. So if you look at 2020 or 2016, in 2016, Trump got a higher percentage, a noticeably higher percentage of the electoral votes than he did of the popular votes. Similarly, in 2020, Biden got a significantly higher percentage of the electoral vote than he did of the popular vote. And that's been true historically. But yeah, I mean, the Electoral College gives each state a minimum of 3 votes, right? 2 votes for their senators and 1 vote or more for the number of representatives they have. Dan, if you go back to 2020 for a second, I want to point something out here. Look at Nebraska and look at Maine. You will see in those states, they have divided electoral votes. That's because in those states, they award their electoral votes, they give 2 votes to the winner statewide, and then they give 1 vote to the winner in each congressional district. Maine has 2 congressional districts. Trump won 1, Biden won the other. Nebraska has 3 congressional districts. Trump won 2, and Biden won 1. It used to be that a lot of states did things the way Nebraska and Maine do, and the other states that did that moved away from that. And part of the reason they moved away from it was because by dividing their votes, their electoral votes, they actually, if you're a larger state, you're actually diluting your influence in the Electoral College. By the way, it may be that for either Trump or Harris to get to 270 in this election, Trump may need that 1 district in Maine, and Harris might need the 1 district in Nebraska to get there. But we have 50 states in the District of Columbia, and with a divided country, it's not so easy to get to 270. And that's kind of what we're seeing on these maps.
And we've gone through a couple of scenarios, and we're going to put this up right now. Here was just our scenario A, and this was just here in our newsroom that we're looking at this. This is the 7 sort of really powerful up for grab states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. Now we're going to we're just going to play devil's advocate here. We're going to show 2 different scenarios. First of all, the scenario where Vice President Harris gets to 270. And look at how close it is if she takes Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. She doesn't take Arizona or Nevada. She does get New Mexico. She does not get North Carolina. She doesn't get Georgia. And look at how razor thin, just as Professor Enton was saying, if this is how it were to fall out, Nebraska, Maine, and their sort of different process could play a role. Is this what you're pointing out?
Exactly.
And that's scenario B, we're calling it.
Right.
Now, scenario C. This is Pennsylvania now playing a major role. Trump takes Pennsylvania, but Kamala still wins. Michigan, Wisconsin. She even takes Arizona and New Mexico, but doesn't have the 270. This is how close it could be in the coming days, correct? Why or why not?
Right. No, that's exactly right. But let me give you yet another scenario. Let's suppose that Harris does not win that one district in Nebraska, or Trump doesn't win the one district in Maine. That leaves us at a tie, 269 to 269. In that event, the presidential election would be thrown into the House of Representatives, where Trump would very likely win, because each state in the House of Representatives gets only one vote, no matter how large their delegation may be. And Republicans control a majority of the state delegations in the House of Representatives, no matter how the House turns out. And that may be as close as the presidential race would be, but I don't think anybody is projecting that the Democrats would get a majority of the delegations in the House, even if they wind up with a majority of the seats in the House. I will defer to Professor Copeland on that one, if she's the data nerd. But I think that if it went to the House, that Trump would have a real advantage because of the way the votes go. Now, I should point out, we have not had a presidential election get to the House of Representatives, well, depending on how you count 1876, where the House was deadlocked as well, and things were done in a very unusual way. But before that, the last time that the House of Representatives resolved a presidential election was exactly 200 years ago in 1824. I think nobody wants the election to go to the House, whatever they think about how it should come out. That would create even more instability and more opportunities for mischief, both at home and abroad, than I think anybody should want to see.
I think when we see voter polls and their confidence in how Congress and the House are doing, I don't think anybody wants that to be how this election is decided. Professor Copeland, let's bring you in, and as we do that, I want to make sure we keep an eye on our 2024 map to see, it looks like something has been called Arkansas now being called for President Trump. He is now up to 101 electoral votes for Vice President Harris. She has claimed New Jersey again. Professor Copeland, shout if there are any surprises here, but I don't think there are. Our battleground states are outlined in gold there for our viewers. Let's get the bigger screen there. But any surprises yet? Or again, I think I asked you this earlier, this really is going to come down to our 7 battleground states, or a state like Iowa that the Des Moines Register poll suddenly suggested in the last couple of days that Iowa may have flipped.
That Seltzer poll was pretty exciting. It suggested that Harris is doing much better in Iowa than anyone had previously thought, especially as Trump previously won the state by 9 points. That poll is particularly interesting, not only because of Ann Seltzer's reputation as one of the most accurate pollsters in the country, but also because it suggests that if Harris is doing well in Iowa, even if she doesn't win, she's probably going to do well in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which is Harris's best path to 270. So that's also a state to watch in terms of margins, but I still think Trump will come out ahead.
What other states other than our battlegrounds should we be maybe paying attention to? Is there a surprise in an Idaho, in a West Virginia, in a Kansas, or no, not West Virginia, I meant Wyoming, or Kansas or Missouri? Are those going to be locks? Or we do now have a call for Vice President Kamala Harris. Illinois now being awarded, according to the Associated Press, goes to Harris, bringing her total up to 71 electoral votes, but again, very early.
Yeah, you won't see Harris's numbers start to go up because Democrats tend to win states that have larger urban centers. You won't see Harris's numbers start to go up until she captures New York, and especially as the polls close in the West, especially California, that will add 53 electoral college votes to her tallies. But no surprises so far. Something I'm also keeping an eye on is the second district in Nebraska. Nebraska is also interesting to watch because they have two reproductive rights initiatives on the ballot. And so while I don't expect Harris to win all three congressional districts or the state, they will very much go to Trump. I'm interested to see the margins there.
What about Kansas? I know Kansas is dealing with reproductive rights, I believe, on their ballot. What do we expect out of sort of that core in the Midwest? And let's just remind our viewers here, here's 2020, how that Midwest broke in 2020, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. If you look at the four won by Trump, sort of that red center of the country. You can see that was bolstered when Trump won in 2016, with the differences coming in Arizona, and we can even go back to 2012, Obama-Romney, and we get that blue wall. And we were talking about Iowa. It's been interesting to watch Iowa, even though it has only 6 electoral votes. Let's go all the way back to 2018. They had 7, meaning their population has decreased a little bit. Blue in 2008, in 2012 it stays blue. It goes red for Trump in 2016, and in 2020 it stays red. This would be a giant win, correct, Professor Copeland, if Kamala Harris were to turn Iowa blue?
I think my jaw would drop if Harris turned Iowa blue. It's certainly not out of the realm of probability. The polls have been so close, with the exception of Ann Seltzer's poll. It has voted Democratic in the past, so only time will tell. It's not obviously on the candidates' radar because they haven't spent any time there aside from the Iowa caucuses. So we'll see. I don't expect any surprises in the breadbasket. Those areas tend to be mostly rural, and the populations tend to be more religious than in other parts of the country, and those voters tend to vote Republican. So I don't expect any surprises there. One thing I'm interested in seeing in Ohio is whether the group of voters who led to the passage of reproductive rights in Ohio, as well as legalization of recreational marijuana, whether that they're going to hold together for issue 1. Of course, Frank LaRose made the language overly complicated, and so it's a difficult one to figure out when you're actually reading the ballot. But those are some interesting things to watch that, while we're mostly focused on the presidential election, there are these interesting referendums and ballot initiatives, as well as the U.S. Senate, which is up for grabs.
And it just so happens, Professor Copeland, that we have An expert on issue one, Professor Jonathan Entin, has done a number of interviews for us here. Professor, let's expound on issue one as we see 7% reporting, 48.5% yes, 51.5% say no. It is very early. We can see Cuyahoga County overwhelmingly yes. Lorain County, this is an interesting number. Lorain County, normally a red county, and they are on the yes side of this. But again, extremely early. Walk us through, Professor Entin, why issue one, and let's get down to the basics. First of all, what is issue one? What was a yes vote for issue one, and what was a no vote for issue one?
Well, issue one was another effort to combat partisan gerrymandering in drawing legislative and congressional districts. Just by way of background, in 2015 and 2018, Ohioans amended the Constitution to set up a system that was supposed to reduce partisan gerrymandering and to encourage bipartisan cooperation.
So we've already voted on this, and it was supposed to have worked.
We voted on this ahead of this most recent round of redistricting. But that system, which by the way was supported, it had bipartisan support up and down the state, and those measures were approved by more than 70% of the voters. The first time we used that new system in the most recent redistricting process, it didn't work the way it was supposed to work. And the Ohio Supreme Court wound up striking down 7 maps for failing to satisfy the current rules. So some of the folks who have been working to combat partisan gerrymandering decided this suggested that the problem with the process was that elected officials were drawing the maps. And so they proposed something that is used in a number of other states, which is an independent redistricting commission, where political figures, current or former elected officials, are not allowed or not eligible to serve on this commission. It's a pretty complicated proposal, and it was vigorously opposed by Republicans. And if you look at the ballot language, which was written by Secretary of State LaRosa's office, it's really well, I think we've talked about this before, Dan. I mean, I think all of the words on the ballot somehow can be traced to some language that's in the actual proposal, but virtually every word choice in the ballot language has a negative implication. And so the ballot language actually sounds like an argument against the proposal. And there's been a lot of controversy about that. The proponents of this amendment actually went to the Ohio Supreme Court to say that this language was not fair and objective. The Ohio Supreme Court, on a 4-3 party line vote, said, well, this language is okay. But I think that the bottom line here really is that the earlier reforms had bipartisan support. This reform seems to be more of a party line split, and that, I think, helps to explain why even the early votes on this proposal are so close, as opposed to what we saw in 2015 and 2018, where, as I said, the leadership in both parties, as well as a lot of grassroots groups, supported these things, and that's why these proposals passed overwhelmingly. But as I said, the first time that those measures were actually put into practice, it looks like they didn't work the way they were expected to work, and that's why we're voting on issue one tonight.
Yeah, here we are back at the drawing board, literally, and you don't really have to look any further, Professor, than to look at the map, the congressional map for Jim Jordan. I'm going to pull this up. He has been declared the winner by the Associated Press. He will head back to Washington or stay in Washington. But a very interesting drawn map here. And this is perhaps where people have a problem with what is called gerrymandering or perceived gerrymandering. You have a district that goes all the way from Mansfield down to Delaware, Bellefontaine, and then all the way up to Lima. Jim Jordan is pretty insulated, correct? He is in a ton of red area, dips his toe into Delaware County. We can even maybe see what the vote is in Delaware, even there in that county. Again, just 1% reporting. His challenger, Tammy Wilson, doesn't win by much. But this is what I mean by being isolated the way the map was drawn, or insulated.
Right. And one of the challenges here is that the state is divided, and we talked earlier about how Democrats tend to do well in urban areas and Republicans tend to do well in rural areas. Well, the federal Constitution requires that congressional and legislative districts have essentially equal population, and in order to do that, you have to draw the lines somehow, and there are so many factors that courts have said are permissible to think about, like protecting incumbents, for example. I mean, one of the questions is, how could we draw competitive legislative and congressional districts when we seem to have a stark urban-rural sort of divide, and so these are really hard questions, and I think Professor Copeland knows a fair amount about some of these challenges. But I mean, I think that there are some actually hard questions that we might want to ask about how we draw districts, and of course, when we have a ballot measure, we tend not to engage in the kind of thoughtful discussion that might be appropriate for these things. And so we wind up getting a bunch of slogans, and we tend to get a bunch of descriptions of the proposal that may not quite jibe with reality.
And Professor Copeland, weigh in here as we look at Marcy Kaptur's district. Again, another one of these very strangely drawn districts, all the way from, she's starting to butt up here into Northeast Ohio. When we come over here to, I believe this is Sandusky County, Erie County, and then she takes Toledo as well as Wood County, Lucas County, heavily Democratic. She's been a representative for this area for years, and it is just another one of these strangely drawn districts, basically just because of how that was drawn. We can look again at Jim Jordan's example. I need to get out of this Zoom. And then I wanted to get to one more. Here's an interesting district, the extreme eastern part of the state, but, kind of goes up, dips a toe into Mahoning Valley, and that's going to be a heavily blue area. That's how these are drawn, and that's what issue one was perhaps trying to battle.
Correct. In fact, Marcy Kaptur's district is infamous for gerrymandering. It has the name as the mistake on the lake because its shape is so odd. If it's possible, it would be great to see a map of the congressional districts in Iowa where they have their maps drawn by a nonpartisan commission, just so you can see the difference in terms of what the districts look like. I mean, part of the problem is about representation, right? How do you best represent people's preferences? And what issue one sought to do or seeks to do is to make the number of legislative and congressional districts in the state be proportional to the outcomes in the presidential election. So, for example, if Trump wins Ohio with 53% of the vote, then 53% of our state legislators and our congressional delegates should be Republicans while the rest should be Democrats. That's at least the logic behind that. Of course, the actual process of drawing those districts is much more complicated. You also see a lot of instances here when you're trying to create a legislative majority. For example, in Ohio, with a Republican legislative majority, you see instances of packing and cracking. And so in Jim Jordan's district, for example, and the other one you showed with Mahoning Valley in it, large Republican areas and then small Democratic areas lumped in with them, which effectively dilutes the Democratic vote. So that's just one strategy that politician-led redistricting commissions can use to create more of an advantage in the legislature and in the Congress. There's no decision is going to be perfect. No process is going to be perfect. And the language on the ballots and on the yard signs has been very confusing. My friends and I were just texting about this morning when a friend said, those that say vote yes for issue one say vote ban gerrymandering, and those who say vote no against issue one say ban gerrymandering. Like, what's that supposed to mean?
Yeah, and anyone who stepped into the polls, and Professor Entin, I'm going to steal a little bit of your line. Was it perhaps by design that the Republican wording was 2 pages at that point? Do people say, well, I don't know what this is, so I'm just going to vote no. I'm going to vote no to all of it. We've had that conversation. I want to go to the map for the state of Ohio again because again, it's very early, but I am seeing something interesting, and perhaps so we can both weigh in here our last 4 minutes before we turn it over to my colleague. I want you to notice, let's go to 4 years ago, to 2020, when Donald Trump wins the state. Notice the one county I want to point out is Lorain County. Wins it 50-48. Now, if we look at tonight's vote, again, still very early, we're starting to see some counties that are blue that were not blue in the past, but it's early. So let's go back to Lorain County, just 18% reporting, but yet now it's Kamala Harris at 52-47. Are we reading too much into this? Is it just too early to look at some of the counties that were red 4 years ago and are at least at this point a blue lean?
I think we probably are reading a little bit too much into some early returns. I live in Lorain County, and I would be surprised if Harris carried the county, although I think she might come closer in Lorain County this time than Biden did last time.
And we can look at Summit County as well, again, very early. And as we've already discussed, in the state of Ohio, you can open up those mail-in ballots the day of. You can start processing them. You just simply can't hit the enter tabulate button until 7:30. So those are going to be some of the first results that you get back are people who voted early in person and people who mailed them in. And historically, those have been Democratic voters. Both Professor Copeland from Baldwin Wallace and Professor Entin from Case Western Reserve University, I want to thank you for your time. We have taken an hour of your very valuable time. And folks, I want you to think about this. These are professors in the world of politics, and they spent an hour with us walking us through these very early results. Professor Entin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Professor Copeland, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Wouldn't have it any other way.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. As I said, what we're going to do here is we're going to put up sort of our rotating map of early results. Keep an eye in the upper right-hand corner, percent reporting. As we're going to swap out here, my partner in crime, Jeff Slauson, is going to take over for the next hour as I start to switch over towards our television side of things. It's going to be a long night, folks. It is an important night for the state of Ohio. It's an important night for our country. I'm Dan DeRose with 19. Stay with us.
Professor, thank you so much. We will be talking to you later. All right, here we go.
Chantel Brown.
Hello there. I apologize for that. We were just rolling on or finishing up our coverage for the first hour there. Can you both hear me? Okay, let me see. I cannot hear either one of you. That probably is on my end. Give me one sec here. All right, can you guys try one more time here?
Yeah, Dave Cohen, can you hear me?
Awesome. Now I can hear you all. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate
Horowitz,
it.
I'm here.
Perfect. I don't know if you both know each other, but I'd like to quasi-introduce you both to each other here on what
Nice
is
to meet you,
a
Dave.
crazy day.
I just saw your colleague Cherie today, so we had a nice event
Oh, you
over at
did?
Cleveland State.
Oh, nice.
Is there anything particular other than, we're going to touch on a ton of stuff here, and again, we're really gracious and appreciative of your time. Is there anything that either one of you are hoping that we touch on that you potentially don't think we would get to on purpose here?
Oh,
I know you covered a lot of stuff earlier, some of the things. So, we can, the Iowa poll and, some, I know you talked in detail about the Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court races. So, we can touch on all those things again if you think that, new viewers will be tuning in.
Yeah, we're pushing it again for this hour, so we're hoping that's the case. And actually, I'm anticipating we get more for this hour, which is good. All right,
I like to talk about turnout. I think that's something interesting to look at, especially here in Cuyahoga County. So I got some numbers on that, and we can talk about just the size of different cities. How Democrats are in the bigger cities and rural. We just have that normal split here. So, more folks in the rural areas are voting Republican. So that's caused us to not be a swing state anymore. And I think Dave would probably bemoan that as much as I do, because we enjoyed it when Ohio was a swing state, at least as researchers and political communication and political scientists. So we bemoan those days that passed.
And
Sure.
lastly, sorry, before your preferred titles, both of you, if you don't mind. Whoever wants to go first.
Professor of Political Science, and I'm director of the Applied Politics program here.
School of Communication, Levin College, Cleveland State.
Okay, if I mess up the titles, do not hesitate to correct me. It's
Okay.
already been craziness. All right, let's see here.
Levin is Levin.
You have until 10.
All right, gentlemen, we appreciate the little interlude that we had there. Jeff Slauson filling back in, or taking over, I guess, for Dan DeRose here as we prepare everybody for the next hour of coverage. I want to thank our previous panel, but also our new panel stepping in here. We have Dr. David B. Cohen, a professor of political science over at the University of Akron. We have Edward Horowitz, Cleveland State University School of Communications. Both of you, I believe, I've spoken to previously. It feels like every single day I'm talking to a new expert on something, which is becoming the norm here. Just going to start off with the easiest way possible, which is, let's see if I can get you both on camera there. That's perfect. Awesome. All right. Going to start off with the easiest way possible to start out. This has already been quite the day here. Whoever wants to take this one, what has surprised in the first hour and a half of Ohio polls opening, and potentially across the country as well? Let's just we'll start with Dr. Cohen, if you don't mind.
Yeah, honestly, especially in Ohio, no surprises so far. And I just caution everybody to jump to any conclusions until most of the votes are counted, because a lot depends on whether rural counties or urban counties are coming in, because those counties tend to break differently in terms of partisanship. And we knew we were going to have a really close race for the U.S. Senate. That seems to be the case. I think Trump is going to win the state of Ohio. The thing that we need to look at is what is the margin of victory going to be, because that's going to have an impact on down ballot races. And if he, equals or surpasses his number from the last 2 election cycles of 8% or more, that's going to be pretty tough for Sherrod Brown to get over that. If it drops under there, the more it drops down, I think the better Sherrod's night is going to be. And I think we have to really look very closely at the U.S. House, the 3 U.S. House races in Ohio that are, going to be very important to Democrats or taking over the House, or Republicans keeping the U.S. House. And then finally, I don't think there's any surprises about about issue 1. And what I think is it's going to be close. And the polling on it was showing it was going to have a huge victory, a few weeks ago. But when you ask people about that issue with the ballot language on it, the numbers drop pretty significantly. And I would not be surprised if that goes down to defeat because of the ballot language. That's very confusing.
We will now go over to Edward Horowitz for the same question there. Any surprises here? I do love the answer, though. In Ohio, there's nothing really right now.
One of the things I was surprised at today has been how the Democrats in Ohio have been really continuing to push with door knocking and the get out the vote effort. That's been really strong for them. So I think there's been a lot of excitement and within the Democratic Party. I've not seen as much, at least in Cuyahoga County and with the Republican Party, but that's not necessarily reflective of the entire state. So that is similar to how the Democrats have been pushing get out the vote efforts in the swing states. Pennsylvania over the weekend, on one day they had over 800,000 door knocks, which is pretty impressive. So they're really trying to do that, get out the vote, and that's turnout is so crucial here for all this. And I think as Dave Cohen just said, we have to wait it out. Don't be fooled by some of the early results. They can be a little bit deceptive on how it comes in. And I think the thing that we're gonna look at, recent polls have suggested here in Ohio, a wide gender gap, at least in terms of support for Sherrod Brown versus Bernie Moreno. The ads that have been playing have been quite outrageous from the Bernie Moreno side, and I think it's been tough for that. But I think a lot of women in Ohio are seeing through that, and I think the abortion issue also around the country, just as in Ohio, is an important one. And I think that may make that race a little bit tighter. And I think we're gonna have to wait until some of those, wait till from Franklin County and Cuyahoga County and Montgomery County, wait till we see from some of these bigger areas how those vote tallies come in before we can rush to judgment here. So there might be a little bit of a mirage in terms of any of the early results, but I think it should all, play out at the end. Turnout has been very high, and I think that is indicative of some of the excitement on both sides of the aisle.
Now let's go through some of that together here. This is the mapping that we have, the system that we have here through all of our Channel 19, our grade data that we basically put together here. I kind of want to just walk through this with both of you, if you guys don't mind here. We touched a little bit on the margin of victory as far as for former President Trump here, at least Professor Cohen, you did. If you can, kind of walk through what we're looking at as far as the actual map that we are seeing. Now, I do have the 2020 map as well, which shows that there's a little bit more strength potentially for Democrats in some areas. I mean, how should we be analyzing this 2024 map as opposed to what was seen in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, not all the votes are in, so we don't know if all those blue counties, truly are going to remain blue. I mean, if Mahoning County remained blue, that would be very good news for Democrats because that is a county like Trumbull in the eastern part of the state that has been trending away from Democrats. It's one of the reasons that, Tim Ryan lost his Senate race in 2022. So that would be a huge pickup for Democrats. And certainly that would, lead to probably Trump not winning by as much. And also, I think that'll be very good news for Sherrod Brown if that were to hold.
I don't mean to cut you off there, Professor Cohen, but as you see the check mark on there, Ohio has officially been called for former President Donald Trump here. So that decision has officially come down there. I'll show really quickly before we get into Sherrod Brown, which I know you were just getting into. I'm so sorry I had to cut you off.
No, you're good.
This is the count that we're looking at right now. We were talking about surprises or potential surprises here. at least as of right now, what I'm seeing is this is going chalk as of right now, right?
I'm sorry, what does chalk mean? As expected?
As expected, yeah.
Yes, no surprises whatsoever right there. And it looks like the presidential is going to come down to those 7 battleground states that both campaigns have decided to duke it out in. And, I think one potential surprise that we saw a few days ago was the Iowa poll that came out by one of the most reputable pollster in the business, Ann Selzer, who showed that Kamala Harris had a 3-point lead in Iowa. If Iowa was a competitive state, that would be shocking, something that nobody would have predicted a week ago.
And that the if Iowa is competitive, it doesn't necessarily portend that the whole race will go, in that direction. But it does suggest that there is a little bit of weakening, and certainly she reported in that result that all of us political scientists and political communication professors like myself were looking at, was that women over 50 were the ones who were breaking. So if you go back to the previous elections, women, white suburban women were in the majority for President Trump, despite grabbing them by this and all the other outrageous comments, perhaps that he may have said, that might have turned off women. So, but now, at least in Iowa, at least in her poll, it seems to suggest that that was breaking. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out here in Ohio with the Bernie Moreno and Sherrod Brown race, and the rest of the country as well. I think when this whole thing ends, when this whole thing is over, finally, the things that are obvious, are not obvious at all until they suddenly are, and if, Donald Trump wins, then, we can say clearly, Kamala Harris just, in this condensed time frame, didn't have enough time to present herself to the country. She's only two vice presidents out of the past 13 election cycles, going back over 50 years, have won the presidency. So statistically, she was in a difficult position to win the race. If Donald Trump wins, then certainly we know the immigration, that all the issues that he's been going on and has supported, and the MAGA movement is strong. And, whatever he has done, the felony, guilty counts, all that didn't really matter to those voters. And maybe, the economy and a weak Biden presidency made it hard for her. And I think here in Ohio, I think when we look at some of the recent polling, the economy has been number one in all of these issues, just like it is around the country. So it's not surprising that Donald Trump won Ohio, and it looks like it's about 8 points, 8 or 9 points here. So that's very similar to how it's been in the past 2 elections, and so it solidifies Ohio as that ruby red color.
Many may get somewhat confused, potentially, seeing this, and then you go to the U.S. Senate, and some of the areas are different. Now, Bernie Moreno, just in the recent tabulation that we have here, has pulled ahead. However, the counties look different, and somewhat, not drastically so, but it doesn't take everybody can kind of see that there is a different voting pattern for some people for the president as opposed to the Senate. As far as how we analyze that and look at that, is that predictable for Ohio voters to potentially vote differently for the president than it is for the Senate race, which is ultimately leading to this one not being called yet?
Yes, I mean, that's the key to Sherrod Brown potentially winning, has been trying to court those voters that would be willing to split their tickets. And I find it particularly interesting that, for example, in the Senate map, but not in the presidential map of Ohio, Sherrod Brown is leading in Trumbull County. That wasn't, that was a county that had left the Democratic column. And there's a couple of others in there too. Delaware County, just north of Columbus, is another one of those counties where Sherrod Brown seems to be leading, that's a county that Trump is winning right now. So Sherrod Brown has had has been very successful at selling himself to a lot of those working class blue collar voters that used to be part of the Democratic base, but since 2016 have become really part of the Republican base, but he has a lot of loyalty among those voters, and they are willing to split their tickets for him.
Yeah, the splitting tickets is something, that voters aren't as consistent as we might think in terms of how they understand the issues, how they understand ideology and partisanship. So it is possible for them. It is common for some of them to split their ticket. And I think it's right. Sherrod Brown's been an incumbent for a number of years. He's very well known here in Ohio. And, Bernie Moreno, similar to J.D. Vance, never held a political office before he ran for Senate. I think, Sherrod Brown had typical types of advertising, starting out in the summer, reintroducing himself to people, sort of those goofy ads of him in the supermarket. And then, of course, everything turned much darker. All of those ads depicting Sherrod Brown as being in favor of trans young people as athletes in Ohio schools and sports programs, when that wasn't true at all. That's something that's already been decided. And so I think it's these types of exaggerations, these types of lies, frankly, make it hard for voters to really sort out the facts. We each live and breathe the media within our own individual bubbles. Nowadays, certainly my students do, and I think most people do. And so they're not getting the corrections, the fact checks that were more common years ago. So I think it's certainly understandable that people would be voting for Sherrod Brown, on that trans issue, even though when you look at the top 10 issues that people care about in Ohio or in the state, that's not one of them, right? It doesn't rank up very, very high, but it's very, it's a cultural issue, and it's a hot button issue for people in that way. And it plays, unfortunately, in this election cycle here, and it may be something that is the thing that sinks it. But I agree with Dave Cohen. Trumbull County, those counties there in the east, those have been moving very heavily over to the Republican side. So if Sherrod Brown wins those, he may win the whole thing, especially as the results come in from the bigger counties, or it may, indicate that there are some cracks here, and that with the right candidate, maybe Tim Ryan wasn't the right candidate. With the right candidate, we might be able to, end the full slate of Republican statewide office holders in the state of Ohio.
Again, speaking with two very phenomenal resources here. We're speaking with Professor Cohen, Professor of Political Science at the University of Akron. He is on the right side of your screen. Sorry, it's flipped for me. I'm also speaking with Professor Horowitz at Cleveland State University, the School of Communications there. Let's hit on a couple more things here before we go back to the national race, if you both don't mind. First, we were discussing this a little bit prior to coming back on here, but the Supreme Court here in the state of Ohio, I think that many people, when they see a judgeship on their ballot, my wife included, potentially are like, I don't understand. These are just names. I think it's important to stress here, what is on the ballot, at least as far as the Democrat and the Republican, controls the strength of the Supreme Court in the state of Ohio. Is that right?
Absolutely right. So these judges play very important roles in the redistricting, in approval or disapproval of ballot measures. They have very heavy importance, and I think voters don't always realize it because they're not exciting cases not all the time, and they're not necessarily breaking into their news feeds on social media, but they play an important role. And over the years, the Republicans have gained more of those seats, and that's definitely had an effect. And when you look at issue 1 and the way the language was there, I mean, former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor spoke out widely about this. She even ran a commercial, talking about the problems with that language. It's very confusing when you read it, and when you have Republican judges who are saying, "Look, Democrats are losing," and so if it's of course that they're going to try these different things. It does seem to be that the justices are not as even-handed as we would like them to be. So yeah, this has been a very important race, and a lot of money has been spent. I know I've seen a lot of money has been spent on ads against them and materials that all over, at least on the east side of Cleveland where I live, on the east side of Cuyahoga County in Cleveland where I live, tons of neighborhood signs for Donnelly have been all over the place, and so I think a lot of attention on this, but that is a harder split ticket, I think, for most people to make in the rest of the state. So I think that's going to be the problem. Would you agree, Dave, that makes it harder?
Well, I mean, and this is only the second or third election cycle that the party label has been on the ballot with the judges. And, with Ohio being a Republican leaning state, that very much favors the Republican candidates. And, I think it's almost assured that all the Republicans are going to win this time. There's going to be a huge Republican imbalance on the court, and that will mean that essentially the Republican legislature, which will have a super majority, will pretty much be able to get their way in terms of any kind of legislation, even if there's some questions about constitutionality.
Yeah, the issue one thing to me shows potentially the greatest flaw when it comes to the actual quote unquote fairness, I guess you could give, right? The language that Professor Horowitz was discussing there, that was approved by the Secretary of State, who is a Republican, and basically the board, which is 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The language then goes to the Supreme Court, which is led by Republicans in there. As far as showing relevance, at least, to why we are concentrating on the Supreme Court race, and then ultimately right here on issue 1, which is showing that no's are winning by a fairly decent margin. Professor Cohen, is this surprising at all that no's are leading 53.4 to 46.6?
No, it's not. When people don't understand what they're voting for, when the ballot language is purposely made to be about the length of a phone book, first of all, most people are not going to have the patience to read through all the language. And the language was purposely misleading. It made it sound like the initiative, which the purpose of it is to end gerrymandering. The ballot language made it sound like the initiative was designed to actually foster gerrymandering. It was misleading. It was purposely misleading. It was purposely it was made to be very lengthy. And again, people are going to vote against it if they're, if they get confused, which I know I've talked to a lot of people. They were very confused about the ballot language. 20 or so years ago, a similar effort was made to reform the redistricting process, and ballot language was put on the ballot that was also extremely complicated. And people don't want to vote for something if they don't understand it, or if it's too complicated. They're either going to just not vote for it at all, or they're going to vote against it.
I think it's really hard for people, if you're voting against gerrymandering, so you're voting yes, right? You're voting yes to say no. It gets very confusing. And I think, I don't know if Dave Cohen's students are like this in Akron, but I know my students at Cleveland State, they aren't seen, they don't have details about many of these races. They don't have details about they know about this, but they haven't had experience with these issues. And I think a lot of people don't really understand what gerrymandering is exactly. So it seems obvious to some of us what it is, but I think for a lot of people it is confusing. They've heard of it, they're not sure. I don't have time to do my own research about it. People always say they want to I'll do my own research on it, and then they're like, I'll just read it at the polls. I'm sure I can figure it out there. It'll make sense. And it just doesn't make sense. And I think, and again, back to my students, it seems unfair to them, right? They seem like, if this is an issue that we all need to decide, it should be clear cut. It should be straightforward so everyone can make a valued judgment on it. And it just seems like the scales here have been tipped in one direction to make it harder for the public, right? And it should be, we would like to believe that our elected representatives and our elected state office holders are looking at our best interests, right? They want to help us, let us sort out the things on our own. But as you can see here, it's not always as objective and fair as some of us would like it to be.
And let me just say, I spend probably a week at least in my American Congress class discussing the topic of gerrymandering. It's a very complicated topic. And if you were to ask, the average American or average Ohioan, what is gerrymandering? Probably 1 in 10 would be able to give you a somewhat accurate definition of exactly what it is and why it's important and why it's a bad thing. So I agree with Professor Horowitz. Just the term itself is very confusing. I think there needs to be much more education on this topic going forward should issue 1 in fact lose. I don't think that the people that want to end gerrymandering are done, but I think much more education is going to need to go into the effort.
I mean this with slight sarcasm just because of who I am, but I feel like when you would say, what is gerrymandering, a lot of people would assume it's something about a person named Jerry, if they are uninitiated, just because of how confusing it potentially is. I cannot tell you both how many conversations I had in the newsroom just explaining to my colleagues what this was.
Yeah.
Because for so many, you see vote yes to get rid of gerrymandering, vote no to get rid of gerrymandering, and where lies the actual truth in that, I think was so difficult for so many because nobody wants to read a 17-page amendment. And I'm going to be frank, without or at least before the article I wrote last week, it did not seem like a lot of people fully understood it even in my space, to understand what this was. And when I reached out to the Secretary of State's office, kind of seemed intentional.
I think that's
right.
it's bothersome. It's bothersome to all of us, right? I don't mean to cut you off, Professor Cohen. People want to see an issue and they want to read it and they want to understand it, and it shouldn't be the lengthy way that it was for this. And I think if you're having problems in the newsroom, you can imagine what the average citizen is struggling with.
And it was intentional. It was made to be intentionally long and complicated, and the purpose, of that was so that it would fail. Gerrymandering is about people in power protecting their jobs, and that's all. And by the way, gerrymandering does actually come from somebody's name, Elbridge Gerry, or Gary, I believe is how he pronounced his name. But yeah, Elbridge Gerry was a vice president, but before that, he was a politician in Boston, and he created a salamander-shaped district in, I believe it was northern Boston. It was shaped very oddly, looked like a salamander, and so the gerrymander came from his last name, Jerry, and salamander, the mander part was that. That's where we get gerrymandering.
Before we get to, a
viewers,
couple more. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I think just let us just say clear, right? So the viewers should understand, if they're watching, we're creating districts so that we can ensure that whoever political party is in charge in Columbus, and this is every state, right, will draw districts both for congressional races and for Senate races in the state legislature and for races in the state house that would benefit them, that they're written, and we could figure out that there are a majority of Republican voters or Democratic voters, may it be if it's the other way around, that would be, so those districts would be 95% to 99% guaranteed that they would be for a political party, and they're drawn not in clear squares. They're drawn in these very odd shapes. Maybe not all salamander shapes, but they're drawn in these very odd shapes. And some people would argue, look, to the victors go the spoils. So if the Republicans control it, then they should have the right to divide the state up in whatever way they want it. And 10 years later, when we redo the districts, whoever's in charge can do it then. But I think when you look at that 8-point margin, which has been now for this race and the past two other presidential cycles, that's what Ohio is. It's 55-45. It's 8 points difference between Republicans and Democrats in the state. So it doesn't make sense that all of the districts should be majority for one party. It doesn't represent the people the way the people represent themselves. So I think that's what ultimately is the problem. But that's a hard thing to explain in a 30-second ad, right? That's a hard thing to explain in an ad that you might throw on social media. There's no clear, easy soundbite to explain that as easy. So I think what Professor Cohen's saying, makes it really hard for people to understand. And as you found out that yourself.
And yeah. From a national perspective, just think of it this way: the United States House has 435 seats. Over 400 of those seats are safe seats in this election because of gerrymandering. There's just a couple of dozen seats that we're looking at over the course of tonight and maybe the next couple of days, depending on what happens in California, that will determine which party is going to control the United States House of Representatives. That means that over 400 of the districts, these are safe seats, which means we already know who's going to win before the election actually takes place. And so what gerrymandering does is it's a process in which the politicians get to pick their voters and not the other way around. It's incredibly undemocratic. It is un-American, and it is one of the reasons why our system, our national political system, and our state political systems are fundamentally broken. I believe that gerrymandering is at the heart of most of the problems, along with campaign finance, but most of the problems in our political system today.
Want to recenter here for those that are just joining our coverage here. Very honored and glad to be joined by two experts in everything that we need experts in today. Professor Cohen out of the University of Akron, Professor Horowitz out of Cleveland State University. Jeff Slauson here with the digital coverage as we continue to track election night on what is let's just say it's an insane day. A lot going on here, and we are trying our best to kind of piece through this as decent as we can. I think the thing to do right now, if we can, let you both jump in as we go, we're going to go through some of the races, and we're just going to kind of go down here in the state of Ohio, if you guys don't mind, kind of walking through with me. So we're just going to start off with the president's race, and at any point, if either one of you want to jump in on anything that we're talking about here, cut me off. That's why you guys are both here for us. So let's just start off. Let's go there. Perfect. The former President Donald Trump has been declared the winner of the 2024 election for Ohio. That is not a surprise, as we have talked about multiple times here. In addition to that, Trump endorsed candidate Bernie Moreno, leading 50% to 46%, essentially 47% around there, over current Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. Actually, I do have a question for anybody to jump in here. If somebody could talk about the balance of power and related to the importance of this Senate race, we saw $400 million plus brought in for a reason. If somebody wouldn't mind just kind of jumping into talking about the balance of power here and why this Senate race is important, not just for Ohio, but for the national landscape as well.
Sure. If Democrats do not hold Ohio, it is extremely likely that the Republicans will take control of the United States Senate. This state's, Ohio and Montana, are probably the two biggest pickup opportunities for Republicans because they are Democratic incumbent senators running for re-election in Republican states. And so the reason that the Ohio Senate race is so expensive and so much more expensive than Montana is because Ohio is a pretty expensive place to campaign. We have several major media markets, which means, it's expensive. There's a lot of 30-second ads that campaigns have to buy. And that $400 million figure, that of course is going to go up because we don't have the figures from the last few weeks as well. So, I mean, we're going to be talking north of $500 million for this Senate race, making it the most expensive Senate race in the United States history. And so the Ohio is a tipping point state for the United States Senate. If Republicans win it, unless something crazy happens or unexpected, like Democrats, win in Texas or some other state, the Republicans are going to take control of the U.S. Senate.
What happens if J.D. Vance and President Trump win? That seat is that something that Governor DeWine will now be the one to appoint someone, or is that suddenly becomes an open seat and we have an open primary and open election for that?
No, that is an appointment by Governor DeWine. It would, and then of course in 2 years it would be a special election, to fill the remaining 2 years of that seat. But yeah, it would be an appointment by DeWine. The rumors I've heard is Matt Dolan is the one that would get that seat.
Because he was the other candidate running for that in the primary with Bernie Moreno, and that essentially would make Matt Dolan the "quote unquote" incumbent when the election comes in 2 years, giving him an edge over that. Certainly, you'd have an open primary for whomever would run. I don't know if Sherrod Brown would try again. He might try again if he loses. I wouldn't put it past that. But I think that makes it an interesting situation. And as Professor Cohen said, right, this was considered a year with a bad map for Democrats because of these challenging situations with Senator Tester in Montana, here with Sherrod Brown, a state with every other Republican office holder statewide being a Republican. So these were tough seats to have to do. Plus, Senator Joe Manchin stepped down in West Virginia. That seat has already been filled by Republicans. That's immediately one seat overturned. So it is very likely that the Senate will be. So even if Kamala Harris is able to win tonight, or whenever that's decided, right, that would put her with a Senate that would be controlled by the Republicans, making it harder for her to appoint judges and other types of legislation that she might want to put through in there. Divided government, people say that that is good for America, but it does make it very hard to get legislation through and make things work, make the wheels of government work properly.
Professor Horowitz, if you ask any more good questions, you'll be taking my job. Not
Sorry.
fair, man. No, dude, I apologize. That's the perfect question to be asking there. All right, let's keep moving down, if we don't mind, gentlemen. Issue 1, we've been touching on here. Numbers are pretty much staying the exact same of what we had seen there. Let's go to Congressional District 4, where Jim Jordan predictably maintains that seat. If we can here, it's tough to show the previous results. I'm just going to be clear because of the changing districts. But this is pretty much, I mean, it's basically the same line, right? So that's no surprise there. Let's move to District 5 here. And again, gentlemen, if I'm saying anything wrong or you want anything switched, please feel free to jump in. We have District 5 officially being called. No switch there. District 6 being called. No switch there. 7, this one's a little interesting. Can someone jump in and kind of go through this? We have an independent candidate getting almost 12% of the vote.
Well, that independent candidate is Dennis Kucinich, and by name recognition alone, I'm not surprised that he gets 1 out of 10 votes. Certainly, I think he tried to run for mayor against Justin Bibb in that primary system, and Max Miller's gotten a lot of attention. He was endorsed by Donald Trump. Signs for him I've seen all over Cuyahoga County. So I don't think any of these. I think Professor Cohen would agree with me. None of these were really, I think, challenging races. I think these were all expected that they would go. And as I said, 95% of all these races are. Marcy Kaptur's is the closest, and I think that's the one that was right up on the screen right now. That she's been struggling with that. In the previous 2 years ago, there was a very close election there, but she always seems to squeak it out over there in that district in the Toledo area. So she manages, but that's the closest. That probably was the closest one of all of them.
Professor Cohen, anything else you want to add on here as we continue to scroll through and almost get to the end there?
Thank you, gerrymandering, right? I mean, that's the reason we have essentially three districts that are of interest tonight, which is, the first district in Southwest Ohio, the 9th district you just showed, and in the 13th congressional district. All the other ones are going as expected. Again, they were gerrymandered. We knew before the night started who was going to win.
Let's go to here the national race if we can, and we can indeed. All right, just some minor updates here, but predictable updates. New York going to Vice President Kamala Harris here, and then again, no real surprises as of yet. Gentlemen, as we start to see more approaching here, what are some of the states that you feel people should be keeping an eye out for that could start to show a lean one way or the other?
It's going to be the blue wall, and in the blue wall meaning Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. There are 4 other battleground states, the Sun Belt states of Nevada and Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. I think Democrats are pretty disappointed in the results coming out of Georgia and North Carolina, which, based on the momentum we were seeing in the last week, I think a lot of Democrats felt that these 2 states were ripe for the picking. Trump won them in 2020. I'm sorry, Trump won North Carolina in 2020. Biden won Georgia in 2020. Democrats were feeling pretty confident they would pick up at least one of these. It looks now like it's possible Trump could win both of those, which I think would mean Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin is going to potentially determine, the next president of the United States. Not terribly surprising there, but potentially so just based on the events of the last week.
Right. In North Carolina over the weekend, it was reported that the Harris campaign withdrew their advertising there, which they essentially said, "Look, we're not gonna win that." So I think that is going there. Georgia, I think, is going to be tight, and it's going to be close. What we're going to see differently than or at least we're expected to see differently than in 2020, is that those numbers are going to come in hopefully tonight, but it's going to go a lot faster than it is. I'm sure you remember back in 2020, we didn't learn. It took a whole week before all these results came in. Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, they have a law that you can't start counting the ballots ahead of time until the end of the election night. When the polls close, you can't actually open those ballots, but Philadelphia invested a lot of money into machines that actually open the ballots and count them a lot quicker. So all that should happen a lot faster. So those things are going to hopefully speed this process up. It was I'm sure you remember, it was very exhausting and excruciating waiting for those results last time around. And also that was with COVID, so more people have turned out to vote in person now. So I think all that should help, but I think we're waiting for these swing states. All of this is expected. Today I passed out maps to my students. I said, look, you can just fill in every other color you can fill in. It's not going to be a surprise. Iowa would be the only surprise, I think, and I think we're all a little bit on pins and needles about how Iowa is going to be related to that poll that came out over the weekend that Professor Cohen mentioned a little earlier tonight. So if there is any inroads there, that can make it, but it's all dependent on these swing states. And what's frustrating, I think, for professors like Professor Cohen and myself, the last time that President Trump won in 2016, it wasn't just less than 1%, and it wasn't less than 1/10 of a percent or 1/100%. It was less than 1/1000th of a percent of the number of voters in America. There are 330 million people here that caused him to win that race. It was almost like, it was like getting a straight flush at a game of poker or four of a kind. All those things had to align. And it may have to be that way now, despite the fact that we're seeing all of these states that we expected them to be. So we're going to wait for those. Might be a couple more hours tonight, and maybe another day or two. And I think the other one to really watch out is Arizona, because you may remember also back in 2020, Maricopa County was the site of a lot of problems counting those ballots. Folks turned up, carrying weapons outside, demanding that they count the ballots and such. So luckily we don't have those problems here in Ohio, but that could certainly slow things down. But it may not make that much of a difference. Viewers could also remember they need to pay attention to Nebraska, right? Nebraska is one of those places where they don't apportion all the electoral votes winner take all. They're divided up by congressional district, and District 2 there is the one surrounding Lincoln. That tends to go Democratic. That's one electoral college vote. So depending upon how things play out, that could be the deciding factor in who gets to 270.
So let's do this here. We had filled in portions of the map here with those that are considered to be quote unquote safe one way or the other, right? And that kind of puts us here. Looking at it this way, this shows where the swing states are. I mean, we can kind of piece this together, but I kind of want to show the importance of Pennsylvania that you both kind of alluded to here. This is basically the path to exactly 270. And if you kind of watch the map, watch Pennsylvania flips, that basically determines is the election. Are we feeling like that's kind of where we're leaning toward right now, where Pennsylvania potentially could hold a massive part in this, if not the deciding part?
Yeah, Pennsylvania is what we would term a tipping point state. And I think I would say that it's the most important state in this election. The blue wall states tend to vote together. So my feeling is if Pennsylvania goes one way, Wisconsin, Michigan are also going to follow. It's been very rare, really going all the way back to the 1980s, that Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania have not voted in lockstep.
Right. Hence the name, the blue wall. And I think one thing that we're going to have to wait for, and we're not going to know until this all plays out, is the Puerto Rican vote. What happened over in Madison Square Garden, those the comedians' comments about Puerto Rico, President Trump not really disavowing that publicly, and then Bad Bunny, the biggest pop star in the world, coming out in support of Kamala Harris and others. That's 5% of the electorate in the whole state of Pennsylvania, right? So large Puerto Rican population, Latino population in Philadelphia, Allentown. And it's a third, and also in some of those other states too, in Wisconsin, Michigan as well. So 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about a race where it's dependent upon those margins, the distance between winning and losing, and what percentage between it, 5% can be a lot. And there were reports that the Puerto Rican vote, the Latino vote, was really breaking away from President Trump after these comments, although he'd been courting them strongly. There are many, many news stories and reports how Latinos, particularly Latino men, have been, attracted to Donald Trump and his campaign. But whether this really changed it, we're not going to know. But that 5% is a big percentage, especially in an election where most people knew who they were going to vote for, and there were only about 5% to 10% of people who were considered persuadable, the undecideds, but considered persuadable too. So maybe Bad Bunny can make a difference. Maybe that joke made a difference. Maybe President Trump, at the end, if he loses, will look back and say, look, I should have apologized for that. But that doesn't seem to be his way to apologize and go back on things. So I think that's something that we will have to watch for as Pennsylvania plays out.
We continue to show you the electoral map, but let's get back to the state of Ohio, which of
You have
course,
the issues, Jeff, that we could talk about, the cigarette tax and the school referendum too.
that one we don't have on here, but I'm more than happy to have us talk about that. Unfortunately, we were limited with our software there, but I'm more than happy to talk about that. If you don't mind, let's start off with that cigarette tax.
Right. So this is issue 55. I was involved in some of that early days with my students, working on some things when that was first introduced a number of years ago. It supports, that money is, because they consider it the sin tax, right? So that money comes from cigarettes. We don't want people to smoke, but so we will tax you extra on top of that, and that money goes to Cuyahoga Arts to help support it. And many people and many institutions are dependent upon that money. It goes everywhere from individual artists to the Cleveland Orchestra, the Museum of Modern Art, small galleries in between, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's an important thing for Cuyahoga County. Arts are crucial for a big part of our economy, a big part of what makes Cuyahoga County a great place to live. And I think that is something, and so that is seen to be getting some support, and I think that has been important for the cigarette tax. Dave, you don't have, what's your sense on how that is coming from Akron?
I don't believe that was Cuyahoga County. tax,
Only,
correct?
right.
Yeah, so to be honest, I know nothing about it.
And the other issue
It's
here in
only in
Cuyahoga
Summit
County,
County, so
that's okay. The other issue in Cuyahoga County is the school referendum. I'm not sure where things are on that, but I think that was going to be close because Cleveland residents don't want to pay more taxes, but certainly our schools are struggling, and that's been important. School levies like that are always challenging, so I'll be interested to see how that plays out. We've certainly seen stories recently, Cleveland Municipal School District struggling with attendance problems. Typical to the area, trying to transform itself. A lot of aging schools, still problems with lead pipes in the water in some of those places. So we have a lot of issues there. So it's not surprising to try and do that. So we'll see how that plays out. It's an important issue in Cuyahoga County as well.
Yeah, these issues are ones that I'm currently trying to piece together here as far as what we actually have and what we don't have on them, because I have enormous amounts of data at the moment, as you both can probably guess here. But yeah, the cigarette one in particular, I do remember when I was voting, that seemed to garner quite a bit of conversation, at least in the line. I was one of those people that waited on Saturday. It took me 2 hours and about 10 minutes to vote. But many people, that was one that seemed to pique interest just from, I think, the actual A to B sense of it, whereas this goes to that. It seems like it was fairly simple for people to kind of comprehend and understand.
Right. So I think, people want to support the arts, but, most people aren't smoking. So it seems like in some ways it's a little bit regressive on people who are buying cigarettes, but it's been successful. And again, many of these art institutions, since COVID, attendance with the arts has declined, and it hasn't always reached those same levels. Same problem is in New York City and Broadway. So having that extra money has been crucial for these budgets. So I think that's why there's been a big push to have it, especially since it's not coming out of your pocket. It's not like you're increasing your own taxes for your own property taxes. It's not coming out of that. It's just coming out of cigarettes. And if you're not buying it, then it's really no skin off your back to have it there.
I do have the latest numbers on that. Yes is currently in the lead, 75.6% to 25.4%. So kind of exactly what we talked about there. You both have been beyond gracious of your time. I'm going to ask you to be just a little bit more gracious here because I'm greedy, and that's kind of the way the things are going right now. We're going to keep you, if that's okay, for just a few more minutes to kind of just go through what we have as of right now here. I want to give you both the time equally as well to be able to say this. So I will start off with you, Professor Cohen here. For those that are watching and for those that are trying to stay up with everything, obviously there's a lot going on here. What is your suggestion for how somebody should potentially handle tonight to either not get ahead of themselves, to just kind of understand what's going on? What is your advice to that person, and how should they be perceiving the numbers we have now?
Yeah, I sometimes give advice. I always forget to follow my own advice, and that is to just wait until most of the votes are counted. Much of it, much of the results depend upon which counties' results have come in. Whether it's been rural counties that have been counting first, or urban counties, that makes a big difference in terms of the vote totals. And as far as just what we're looking at tonight, focus on the battleground states, the 7 battleground states. If you're looking at the national map, the U.S. Senate race in Ohio, very important. The 3 congressional districts in Ohio, the 1st, the 9th, and the 13th are, swing districts that they're going to help determine who is going to control the U.S. House of Representatives. And of course, the referendum, issue number 1, although I think it's probably safe to say that's in real trouble at this point.
Yeah, I think that's probably safe to say as we pull that up there, 54.4% to 45.6%, with 66% of the estimated total vote in there. If you really can, really quickly there, Professor Cohen, for those that are unfamiliar with how much 66% actually dictates on that, I mean, that's a significant amount to determine where something is going, right?
It is, and I would have to be able to dig into the county numbers and see which counties have come in, unless the urban counties have just a tiny percentage, which I don't think that's the case. That's a pretty significant gap for the yes folks to make up.
Professor Horowitz, I position you the same-ish question on there, which is, where should people look on this? How should people look on this? And as far as potential outlook, when can we have answers?
I think something that our viewers can think about, and we're not going to have this data right away, but we're going to look at turnout here in Cuyahoga County. And something there, turnout was about 650,000 votes back in 2012 when President Obama was running for his second term. That was really high, and then it dropped to almost 597,000. Sorry, throwing out these numbers here. And back in 2020, it was kind of in the middle of that. So I think we're going to have to see, the enthusiasm gap. Is that a problem? If Kamala Harris ends up losing this election, I think people are going to look back at this and say, turnout was not strong. She was not able to get, different groups, maybe African American men, Latino men on into her side, the compressed speed of this race. But I think what we're going to be left with is, and again, as a political communication professor, I think we're going to feel sad that we have sort of a coarsening of our political discourse, right? One of the things I talk about with my students for much of the semester is that no matter what's been happening in this race, be it the debates, be it the introduction of Tim Walz as the vice president, be it childless cat ladies, the comments made about Haitian immigrants in our own state, Springfield, Ohio, nothing has really moved people away from their support of Donald Trump. And I think this is going to augur to other candidates saying, look, after this is done, who's going to be the next person taking over that mantle? J.D. Vance has obviously aligned himself to be that person. But I think that's the kind of tone and rhetoric that may have to be needed to get people excited. We had a primary early on with Ron DeSantis from Florida. He was Trump without the Trump personality, and that failed, terribly. Nikki Haley certainly failed terribly. And all of us, Professor Cohen, I'm sure too, been talking about the gender gap, the problems, the Nikki Haley voters. Why hasn't Donald Trump reached out to those, to women in the way? Why is he doubling down on the bros? And I think when we look at this, if he does win, we'll say, look, that was the right strategy to go about it, that he doesn't need to widen the base. But as Professor Cohen said, it's early. None of those swing states have decided anything yet. So just try and be patient. You may need to go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow to find out the answer. And it may take until Friday or Saturday before we really know. Hopefully not, but just be patient. We all want to have it sorted out right away, but we may not know for a few days.
really quickly here, the last time that we had this was just in 2020. We officially found out on a Saturday, which was my wedding day, so that will stay with me for the rest of my life because that was a fairly important day of my life that became very political. Gentlemen, you have been so beyond gracious of your time. The expertise you provided has been something that I am so beyond grateful for, and I know our viewers are as well. I want to identify you both again. Professor Cohen, Professor of Political Science over at the University of Akron, who is on the far end, and then I'm not going to say left or right because I'm probably going to get it wrong again, and then Professor Horowitz with Cleveland State University, the School of Communications. Thank you both so much. This has been a very crazy day, and to have your expertise again has been so beyond amazing. We thank you both very much for your time and hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And let's hope that things maybe solidify a little bit so you guys can talk about it more in your classes during the week.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both. We really appreciate it. And for our coverage here, we were going to leave our map on. We will continue over on 19 News, starting over on WUAB. The long day keeps getting longer. We're going to try and make it a little easier and a little less scary for you. We'll see you all over on 19 News, Channel 43, then 19 at 11 o'clock. Thank you all so much. Professors, you guys were both excellent. Really, really appreciate the time. Thank you both so much.
Thanks very much. If you need anything tomorrow, give me a call or send me a message. I'm happy to do what I can for you guys.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye, Dave.
Take care.